He was the Italian Don. She was the runaway hiding in plain sight. He lost the one he loved to a battle he couldn't win. He refused to lose this stranger to men he could destroy. The Russians stormed in for their prize. He saw a ghost from his past. He failed to save his sister. He couldn't fail to save this girl. The threat closed in. The espresso cup hit the saucer. What happened next in that Chicago diner changed everything. Welcome back. Today, we're diving into the complete story of a terrified waitress running from her past, and the ruthless Italian mafia boss who asked one deadly question: who dared touch her? This is a story of protection, power, and the fight for freedom. Grab your seat, hit that subscribe button, and let's get started. Inside Tony's diner on West Division Street, the fluorescent lights buzzed with the same erratic rhythm as Charlotte's heart. She stood behind the scratched laminate counter, wringing out a damp rag until her knuckles turned bone white. The wall clock read 11:45 p.m. 15 minutes until closing. Please, she thought, glancing toward the rain-streaked window where darkness pressed against the glass like a living thing. Let this night end. Let me disappear for one more day. Charlotte looked nothing like the heiress she'd been born to be. She'd traded silk blouses for a polyester uniform 2 sizes too big, and her once glossy auburn hair was scraped back into a severe bun that hid half her face. She was 23, but tonight she felt ancient, hollowed out and brittle. Her sleeve slipped as she wiped down the counter, exposing the jagged pale scar encircling her left wrist. A souvenir from the car accident that killed her parents 18 years ago. 5-year-old Charlotte had been the sole survivor, pulled from twisted metal and shattered glass. That scar was her history, written in flesh. It was also the only map her enemies needed to find her. Char, honey, quit scrubbing the varnish off my counter, Tony grunted from behind the grill, spatula in hand. Go pour a refill for the booth in back. And for God's sake, don't look him in the eye. Charlotte's breath caught. The booth in back. She'd avoided that corner all night. The air around it felt different, heavier, charged with static electricity that made her skin prickle. 3 men occupied the booth. 2 were massive, their necks thick with muscle, wearing tailored suits that cost more than Tony's entire monthly rent. But it was the man in the middle who seemed to consume all the oxygen in the room. Nicholas Bruno. You didn't have to follow organized crime to know that name. The Bruno family controlled the docks, the Teamsters, and half of City Hall. Nicholas was the Don, terrifyingly young at 32, with sharp aristocratic features and eyes the color of dark espresso. He wasn't eating. Just sitting there, one elegant hand resting on the scarred formica, watching the room with a predator's cold patience. Coffee, sir? Charlotte's voice trembled as she approached, coffee pot shaking in her grip. She kept her head down, praying he wouldn't really see her. Nicholas didn't answer immediately. His gaze tracked her movements, the tremor in her fingers as she poured, the way she angled her body toward the exit, ready to bolt. It was the stance of prey anticipating the kill. But when he truly looked at her, past the oversized uniform and defeated posture, something in his expression fractured. He saw the pronounced collarbones, the bruised shadows beneath her eyes, the fragility that suggested a strong wind might shatter her completely. The ghost of his sister materialized in his mind. Isabella. She'd been 22 when the rare blood disorder took her. Nicholas had conquered the Chicago underworld, built an empire, commanded loyalty through fear and respect, yet he'd been powerless to save his baby sister. He'd watched her waste away in sterile hospital rooms, drowning in his own helplessness. Looking at this waitress now, he recognized that same terrifying vulnerability. She's starving, he thought, jaw tightening. And she's running from something. Who the hell is hunting her? What's your name? His voice came out softer than his bodyguards had ever heard. Char. Charlotte, she stammered, risking the briefest glance upward. Charlotte. He tested the name, finding its weight. You should go home. Streets aren't safe this time of night. I work until midnight, sir. Nicholas frowned, reaching into his jacket. He pulled out a crisp $100 bill and slid it across the table. "Get yourself a cab. Don't walk home." Charlotte stared at the money, more than 3 shifts worth of tips. "I can't." "Take it." Not a request. A command. Before she could respond, the bell above the entrance chimed. The sound seemed innocent enough, but the blast of frigid air that followed froze Charlotte's blood solid. She looked up, and the coffee pot slipped from her nerveless fingers. Crash. Hot liquid splashed across her sneakers, but she didn't register the burn. Couldn't feel anything except ice-cold terror flooding her veins. 5 men filled the doorway. They weren't Italian. They were broad-shouldered, wearing heavy wool coats dark with rain. Hard, brutal faces, men who killed as casually as breathing. Russian bratva. Charlotte knew them. Not their names, but she knew who'd sent them. Uncle Fedorov. He found me, she thought, chest constricting. After 6 months of running, he finally found me. The leader, a bull of a man with a gold tooth and a scar bisecting his eyebrow, scanned the diner. His eyes passed over Tony, over the drunks hunched at the counter, and locked directly onto Charlotte. His smile was cruel, triumphant. "Found you, Tichka," he said, accent thick as motor oil. "Little bird." Nicholas Bruno went absolutely still. He watched the color drain from the waitress's face, watched sheer terror bloom in her eyes, the same expression Isabella had worn near the end. But Isabella had died from disease. This girl was being hunted by men. And men were something Nicholas Bruno knew how to handle. The Russian stepped forward, dismissing everyone else in the room as irrelevant. He didn't even register the dangerous man watching from the shadows. His entire focus fixed on Charlotte. "Your papa wants you home," he sneered, reaching into his coat. He produced heavy-duty zip ties. "And he is very unhappy with you." Charlotte stumbled backward, stepping onto broken glass. "No," she whimpered, clutching her scarred wrist. "Please, no." Nicholas watched the Russian advance on the girl who looked so much like his dead sister. That old, familiar rage, the fury of a man who'd failed to save the one person he loved most, coiled tight in his gut. The fluorescent lights seemed to stop buzzing. The air itself held its breath. Nicholas Bruno slowly, deliberately set his espresso cup onto its saucer. The delicate clink of china echoed like a gunshot in the sudden silence. We've all faced moments when we felt powerless against forces beyond our control. Here's my question for you. Do you think Nicholas is stepping in purely to assert dominance, or is his grief for Isabella truly driving him to protect a complete stranger? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I'm genuinely curious what you think. The clink of Nicholas's espresso cup against the saucer echoed like a judge's gavel, but the Russians didn't hear it. Their eyes stayed locked on Charlotte, predator to prey. Charlotte pressed her back against the cold stainless steel pie display, its compressor humming against her spine. The smell of burnt coffee and rain suddenly morphed into phantom scents, antiseptic, burning rubber, wet asphalt. Memory was cruel. In panic, it didn't comfort. It weaponized. As the Russian leader stepped closer, blocking out the diner's harsh light, Charlotte wasn't seeing a thug in a wool coat anymore. She was 5 years old again, strapped into her parents' Lexus. She heard tires screaming, the sickening crunch of metal folding like aluminum foil, then, silence. That absolute, suffocating silence where her mother's laughter used to live. She'd survived. A miracle, the lawyers and doctors had said. But survival had come with strings attached. Strings named Uncle Fedorov. Fedorov wasn't a father, he was a portfolio manager. He hadn't taken in a grieving niece, he'd acquired a trust fund with a pulse. For 18 years, Charlotte had lived in his penthouse overlooking Lake Michigan, surrounded by marble floors, silent housekeepers, and luxury that felt like a tomb. She'd attended elite boarding schools in Connecticut, worn designer clothes, and starved for one single moment of genuine affection. 6 months ago, she'd finally decided to run. It was in Fedorov's study, all dark mahogany and Cuban cigars. He hadn't even looked up from his financial reports when he'd delivered the verdict. "You'll marry Mr. Vlasov this October," he'd said, voice dry as dust. Vlasov was 53, cruel, and owned a shipping empire. He had a reputation for breaking things: racehorses, business deals, and wives. The merger requires it. Your inheritance requires a husband's signature to unlock. It's efficient. Efficient. That word had shattered something inside her. She wasn't a person to him, she was collateral. Livestock being traded to secure a Baltic shipping route. That night, she'd packed one duffel bag. Cut her waist-length hair in a Greyhound station bathroom with dull scissors. Became Charlotte the waitress, erasing the heiress completely. But she couldn't erase the scar on her wrist, that jagged white lightning bolt from the crash. It was the only proof she was who they claimed. "Let me see the arm," the Russian leader grunted, yanking Charlotte back to the present. He didn't ask. He lunged. His hand, rough, reeking of tobacco and violence, clamped around her left forearm. Charlotte cried out, dropping her order pad. It hit the floor with a sharp slap that made the drunk at the counter flinch. "No! Let go!" She twisted away desperately. But he was too strong. He yanked her arm forward, ripping her polyester sleeve up to the elbow. There it was. The scar. White against pale skin, unmistakable. "Confirmed," the Russian growled, flashing a gold-toothed grin at his crew. "It's the niece. Grab her." In the back booth, Nicholas Bruno's world tilted sideways. He sat motionless, face a mask of cold indifference, but inside, a dam was cracking. He watched those dirty fingers dig into the girl's pale skin. Watched Charlotte squeeze her eyes shut, bracing for pain, her whole body trembling like a sparrow in a storm. It wasn't the violence that broke something in him. Nicholas was intimately familiar with violence, he'd broken bones and ordered executions since his early 20s without losing sleep. It was the helplessness. Charlotte's image superimposed itself over his sister's ghost. "Nico, it hurts," Isabella had whispered 3 years ago, her voice thin as tissue paper. She'd been in a private suite at Northwestern Memorial, $5,000 a night, hooked to machines that beeped out the countdown to her death. Nicholas had held her hand then, terrified his grip would crush her brittle bones. He was the Don. He controlled the Teamsters. He had aldermen and judges in his pocket. He had millions in offshore accounts and soldiers who'd die on his command. But he couldn't bribe death. Couldn't intimidate a blood disorder. He'd watched the light drain from Isabella's eyes, day by excruciating day. The grief had hollowed him out, leaving a frozen cavern where his heart used to beat. I couldn't save her, Nicholas thought, knuckles white against the table edge. I had all the power in the world, and I was useless. He watched the Russian drag Charlotte across the floor. She was sobbing now, a raw, broken sound that carved through the diner's atmosphere. "This isn't disease," a voice roared in his mind, primal and furious. "This isn't something I can't fight. This is just a man." And Nicholas Bruno knew exactly how to break men. The paralysis that had gripped him for 3 years shattered like cheap glass. This girl, this stranger with haunted eyes and a scar that mapped her trauma, wasn't going to die tonight. Not while he still drew breath. "Hey!" Tony finally found his courage, grabbing a Louisville Slugger from behind the counter. "Let her go. Get out of my diner." The Russian didn't even turn. Just backhanded Tony casually. The old man went down hard, the bat clattering uselessly across linoleum. "Quiet, Dadushka," the Russian spat. He gripped Charlotte's jaw, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Your uncle misses you, Tichka. He has your wedding dress picked out." Charlotte's eyes flooded with despair so deep it looked like drowning. She stopped fighting. Went completely limp, accepting the inevitable. "I tried," her eyes said. "I tried to be free, but the cage is inescapable." That look of resignation was the final straw. Nicholas Bruno stood up. He didn't rush. Didn't shout. He unfolded his 6'2" frame from the booth with the lethal grace of a big cat waking. His Tom Ford suit settled perfectly across his shoulders. He buttoned his jacket, eyes never leaving the Russian's hand on Charlotte's wrist. The movement was subtle, but the shift in atmosphere was seismic. Nicholas's two bodyguards stood instantly, hands drifting inside their jackets toward shoulder holsters. "You have 5 seconds," Nicholas said. His voice wasn't loud, but it sliced through the rain and sobbing like a straight razor. The Russian leader froze. Slowly turned his head. Saw the expensive suit. The Italian bone structure. The eyes, dark, fearless, burning with cold promise. "This is family business," the Russian sneered, though his grip on Charlotte loosened slightly. "Go back to your cannoli, Italian." Nicholas took one measured step forward. Then another. His Ferragamo shoes made no sound on the floor. "You touched my waitress," Nicholas said softly. "You assaulted my business owner. And you're breathing my air." He stopped 3 feet away. Looked at Charlotte, really saw her, and gave her a barely perceptible nod. "I'm here." Then he looked back at the Russian. "Time's up." "Time's up?" The Russian leader echoed with a rough, incredulous laugh. He looked Nicholas up and down, dismissing the tailored suit and polished Ferragamos. "And what are you going to do, Italian? Throw money at me? I work for Viktor Volkov. I don't care about your little neighborhood cruise." He made a fatal mistake then. To emphasize his point, he tightened his grip on Charlotte's arm, twisting until she cried out. "She comes with us," he spat. "Now sit down before I break your pretty face." Nicholas didn't blink. Didn't flinch. He just watched Charlotte's face contort in pain, and something inside him, that dark, frozen place where he kept his grief, snapped shut like a steel trap. He didn't scream. Simply raised his right hand and adjusted his cufflink. It was a small gesture. Casual. Elegant. And it was the signal for war. The diner's front window exploded inward. Not a bullet, the butt of a tactical rifle. Glass showered across the linoleum like diamonds. Before the Russians could reach for their weapons, the front door was kicked clean off its hinges with a deafening crash. 10 men poured in through the shattered entrance. They weren't wearing mismatched wool coats. They wore identical black tactical gear, moving with the terrifying synchronization of special forces. These were Nicholas's Lupi, his wolves, the personal guard who'd been waiting in blacked-out SUVs lining the block. "Drop it," one roared, leveling a suppressed MP5 at the Russian leader's skull. Victor went sheet white. He released Charlotte instantly, hands flying up. The sudden release sent her stumbling backward, bracing for impact with the hard floor. But she never hit it. An arm, strong and steady as iron, wrapped around her waist. Charlotte gasped, looking up. Nicholas had moved faster than seemed possible, crossing the distance in the chaos and catching her before she fell. He pulled her against his chest, shielding her body with his own. She caught his scent, expensive sandalwood cologne, rain, and the metallic tang of adrenaline. "Stay behind me," Nicholas murmured against her ear, his voice eerily calm amid the violence erupting around them. The Russians were tough, but they were trackers, not soldiers. And they were catastrophically outnumbered. One Russian tried reaching for a boot knife. Before his fingers touched the handle, Nicholas's bodyguard, a giant named Marco, stepped forward and delivered a piston-like punch to the man's throat. The Russian collapsed, gagging and gasping. "Down. On your knees," Marco bellowed. It took less than 30 seconds. Tables shoved aside. Russians disarmed, weapons kicked across the floor. All 5 powerful men who'd walked in like conquerors were now forced to their knees in a jagged line, hands locked behind their heads, staring down the barrels of 10 Italian guns. The diner fell into suffocating silence, broken only by wind whistling through the shattered window and the Russian's ragged breathing. Nicholas slowly released Charlotte. He didn't look at her, but kept one hand hovering near her, a subconscious barrier between her and the threat. He stepped forward, Italian leather crunching softly on broken glass. He walked down the line of kneeling men like a general inspecting troops, stopping in front of Victor. Victor was bleeding from a forehead gash. He looked up, eyes wide with the realization of how catastrophically he'd miscalculated. He wasn't dealing with a street gang. He was dealing with the King of Chicago. Nicholas crouched to eye level. Didn't shout. Didn't curse. He reached out and gripped Victor's chin, forcing eye contact. Then he glanced back at Charlotte. He saw the angry red fingerprints blooming on her pale arm, fresh bruises overlaying the white scar of her past. Nicholas turned back to Victor, his eyes black and bottomless. Who dared touch her? The question hung in the air, heavy and lethal. Victor swallowed hard, sweat mixing with blood. I was following orders. Her uncle. I didn't ask about her uncle, Nicholas interrupted, voice dropping to a terrifying whisper. I asked who touched her. Victor trembled. I did. Nicholas stood, towering over them. He adjusted his jacket, smoothing a non-existent wrinkle. You walked into my city. Threatened a woman under my protection. Put your hands on her. He turned to Marco. Lock the doors. Nobody leaves. Nicholas walked back to Charlotte. She was shaking, pressed against the counter, eyes darting between the gunman and the man who'd just saved her. She looked at Nicholas with equal parts awe and terror. He wasn't a hero in shining armor, he was a monster who devoured other monsters. Are you hurt? Nicholas asked, scanning her arm. I don't think so, Charlotte whispered. Good. Nicholas turned back to the 5 kneeling men. He unbuttoned his cuffs and slowly rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms corded with muscle. You have 2 options, Nicholas announced, his voice echoing off tile. Option 1, my men drag you to the alley. We finish this the old-fashioned way. You disappear. Nobody finds the bodies. The Russian stiffened, knowing the Bruno family's reputation. Option 2, Nicholas continued, pointing at Charlotte. You apologize. You beg. You convince her to let you live. Because right now, her word is the only thing keeping you breathing. The Russian leader stared at the waitress, the girl in the oversized uniform, the girl he'd called Tichka. The power dynamic had flipped so violently it made his head spin. Nicholas crossed his arms, waiting. I suggest you start begging. The silence in the diner was suffocating, thick with the smell of rain and the copper tang of blood from Victor's split forehead. Viktor Volkov, a man who'd broken fingers for late payments and hunted debtors across 3 continents, looked at Nicholas Bruno and saw no mercy. Only cold, mathematical calculation. Beg, or die. Victor swallowed his pride. It tasted like ash. He turned toward the waitress. Toward Charlotte. 10 minutes ago, she'd been a little bird he could crush. Now, standing in the shadow of the Italian wolf, she was untouchable. Slowly, painfully, Victor shuffled forward on his knees. Glass shards crunched under his weight, biting through his pants, but he didn't dare flinch. The 4 men behind him followed, a pathetic procession of humbled violence. Miss. Victor's voice cracked. He cleared his throat, forcing the words out. Miss Charlotte. We made a mistake. Nicholas leaned against the counter, arms crossed. I can't hear you. Victor's face flushed crimson. We made a mistake, he shouted, looking up at Charlotte with pleading eyes. Please. Tell him to let us go. We'll leave Chicago. Never come back. I swear on my mother's grave. Just, please. Beg her, Nicholas commanded softly. I'm begging you. Victor cried, grasping toward the hem of her uniform but terrified to actually touch her again. Have mercy. Charlotte stared down at them, heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird. She didn't feel powerful. Didn't feel triumphant. Just sick. The violence, the fear, the whiplash, it was overwhelming. She looked at Nicholas. Let them go, she whispered, voice trembling. I just want them gone. Nicholas held her gaze, assessing. She wasn't vindictive. Didn't want blood, just peace. He nodded, respecting that. He turned to the Russians. You heard the lady. They scrambled up, slipping on wet linoleum in their desperation. One more thing, Nicholas said, his voice freezing them at the door. If I see any of you in Chicago again, if I even catch a whiff of your cologne in my city, you won't get a chance to beg. Get out. They vanished into the rainy night, leaving the door swinging on broken hinges. Adrenaline drained from Charlotte's system, leaving her knees weak. She slumped against the counter, burying her face in her hands. You can't stay here, Nicholas said. Not a question, a fact. Charlotte looked up, tears streaking through the grime on her face. I have nowhere else. I can't go back to my apartment. They know who I am now. Exactly, Nicholas said, gesturing to Marco. Pull the car around. He turned back to Charlotte. Fedorov knows you're in the city. Those men will call him the second they're clear of my territory. He'll send more. Professionals. Men who won't walk through the front door. So what do I do? Charlotte asked, a sob catching in her throat. Run again? No, Nicholas said, stepping closer. The intensity in his eyes pinned her in place. You stop running. You come with me. The drive to the penthouse was a blur of city lights and silence. Nicholas's car was a fortress on wheels, armored glass, soundproofed, smelling of leather and money. Charlotte sat as far from him as possible, staring out the window. She was trading one cage for another, and she knew it. But at least this cage had a lock on the inside. They arrived at Bruno Tower, a glass needle piercing the Chicago skyline. The penthouse was breathtaking, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, sleek modern furniture, immaculate and cold. Beautiful, but completely empty. Guest suites down the hall, Nicholas said, tossing his keys onto a marble console. There are clothes in the closet. Might be big, but they're clean. Shower. Rest. You're safe here. Charlotte nodded mutely and disappeared down the hallway. The moment the door clicked shut, Nicholas released a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He walked to the window, staring down at the city grid below. He kept seeing it. The fear in her eyes. The fragility of her wrist. I saved her, he told himself. She's safe. But his trauma whispered back, for now. You saved Isabella for a while, too. Until you turned your back. Anxiety, cold and serpentine, coiled around his heart. What if she ran? What if she panicked and left the building during a meeting? What if Fedorov snatched her off the street before Nicholas could react? He couldn't rely on guards alone. Guards made mistakes. Guards could be bribed. Nicholas walked to the side table where Charlotte had left her cracked smartphone. She'd forgotten it in her days. He picked it up. The screen lit, no passcode. He knew it was wrong. Knew it was an invasion of privacy. But looking at that phone, he didn't see a device, he saw a lifeline. The only way to ensure he wouldn't be standing at another funeral, staring at a coffin that was too small. He pulled a cable from his desk drawer and connected her phone to his encrypted laptop. His fingers flew across the keyboard. He wasn't just checking messages, he was installing military-grade software deep in the operating system. A ghost tracker. It would ping her location to his personal watch every 30 seconds. Alert him if her heart rate spiked. Activate the microphone if she screamed. I'm sorry, Charlotte, he whispered as the progress bar hit 100%. But I'm not losing you. He disconnected the phone and placed it back exactly where she'd left it. When Charlotte emerged 20 minutes later wearing one of his oversized cashmere sweaters, she looked cleaner, softer. Thank you, she said, spotting her phone and picking it up without suspicion. For everything. Nicholas looked at her, guilt sitting heavy in his stomach, warring with the relief that he'd always know where she was. You don't need to thank me, Nicholas said, voice dark and serious. Just promise me one thing. Don't leave this building without me. Charlotte touched the scar on her wrist, studying this terrifying, beautiful man who'd saved her life. I promise. Nicholas nodded. He had her promise. And just in case that promise was broken, he had the signal. Nicholas justifies invading Charlotte's privacy with the tracker as necessary to keep her alive. Here's my question, is his action romantic because it's protective, or is it a red flag because it's controlling? Where do you draw the line? Let me know in the comments. The storm battered the penthouse's glass walls, but inside, silence reigned absolute. Charlotte perched on the edge of the sprawling white sofa, hands wrapped around a mug of tea Nicholas had placed before her. She felt impossibly small, in the massive room, in his oversized cashmere sweater, in the grand scheme of a city ruled by men with guns. Nicholas stood by the gas fireplace, watching flames dance over ceramic logs. He'd shed his suit jacket, sleeves rolled to his elbows. Without that armor, he looked less like a king and more like a warrior catching his breath between battles. He turned, expression unreadable. We need to talk, Charlotte, he said gently. I can protect you, but I can't fight a ghost. I need to know why Fedorov's hunting you. Men like him don't send 5 trackers after a runaway niece just because they miss family dinners. Charlotte stared into her tea. She owed him this. He'd saved her. Given her sanctuary. It's not about love, she whispered, voice steadying. It's about a signature. Nicholas moved closer, sitting on the coffee table across from her, not looming, just listening. Tell me. My parents left everything to me, Charlotte began, old shame burning in her chest. When they died in the crash, the estate, the stocks, the properties, it all went into a trust. Uncle Fedorov was named executor until I turned 21. You're 23 now, Nicholas noted. I am, she nodded. But there was a clause. A stipulation my father added to protect me from fortune hunters. She let out a bitter, hollow laugh. The trust only unlocks fully when I marry. Until then, my guardian controls the dividends. Nicholas's eyes darkened. He understood immediately. So Fedorov wants to maintain control. He doesn't just want control, Charlotte said, looking up, blue eyes brimming with tears. He wants to cash out. He's made catastrophic investments. He's hemorrhaging money. He needs the principal, the core fortune. And he can only access that if I marry someone he controls. She took a shaky breath. He arranged a marriage. To Sergei Vlasov. Nicholas froze. The name hit like a physical blow. Vlasov? Nicholas repeated, voice dangerously low. The butcher of Kiev? The man's 53 years old. He's buried 3 wives. I know, Charlotte whispered, a tear escaping down her cheek. My uncle called it a strategic merger. Vlasov gets the shipping routes, and my uncle gets access to my trust fund. I'm just the key. Once I say I do, they get everything. And I get. She didn't finish. Didn't have to. They both knew what happened to Vlasov's wives. They disappeared. Fell downstairs. Had accidents. Nicholas stood abruptly, walking back to the window. His reflection was a mask of fury. He thought of Isabella again. How he'd have burned the world to see her smile one more time. And here was Fedorov, selling his own flesh and blood, a girl who'd already lost everything, to a monster like Vlasov for profit. It was grotesque. A sin against everything Nicholas believed. He turned back. Charlotte looked terrified he'd kick her out now that he knew the baggage she carried. He walked over and knelt on one knee, a position of submission no Don ever took. He reached out and gently took her left hand, the one with the scar. He ran his thumb over the jagged white line on her wrist. The skin was cool to the touch. You are not a key, Nicholas said, voice fierce and rough with emotion. And you are not livestock. Charlotte looked at him, startled by the intensity burning in his gaze. But if they find me? Let them try, Nicholas vowed. Fedorov thinks you're weak because you ran. Thinks you're currency. But he forgot that currency only has value if you can hold it. He squeezed her hand carefully, avoiding the scar. You're not leaving this tower until you're ready. You're under the protection of the Bruno family. In this house, we don't sell family. We defend it. Charlotte felt warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the tea. For the first time since the car crash 18 years ago, she didn't feel like a burden or a pawn. She felt seen. Why? She asked softly. Why are you doing this? You don't even know me. Nicholas looked at her, and the mask slipped completely. The grief, the loss, the sister he missed every single day, it was all there in his eyes. Because, Nicholas said, voice thick, I know what it feels like to be helpless. And I promised myself I'd never let anyone I care about feel that way again. He stood, releasing her hand but leaving the ghost of his touch on her skin. Rest, Charlotte. Tomorrow, we figure out how to break them. He walked toward his bedroom, leaving her in the fire's soft glow. Charlotte touched her wrist where his thumb had been. The scar didn't hurt anymore. For the first time, it felt like just part of her story, a story that might, finally, have a hero in it. But neither of them saw the notification blinking silently on Nicholas's laptop in the study. A news alert. Breaking, warehouse explosion in Bruno territory. Multiple casualties reported. Fedorov wasn't waiting for the wedding. The war had already begun. Morning didn't break over Chicago, it bled through the smoke. Charlotte woke not to the smell of coffee, but to the acrid, metallic scent of burning rubber. She sat up in the guest suite's massive bed, heart already racing. The penthouse's silence had been replaced by low, frenetic energy. She padded barefoot down the hallway, marble cold against her skin. The living room that had felt like sanctuary last night now resembled a war room. Nicholas stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, phone pressed to his ear, other hand gripping a leather chair so hard it groaned. He still wore last night's trousers, but his white dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up, revealing the tension in every muscle. I don't care about the shipment, Marco, Nicholas snarled into the phone. I want to know how they breached the perimeter. I want names. I want heads. He slammed the phone onto the table. The screen cracked under the force. Nicholas? Charlotte whispered. He spun around. For a split second, his face was pure, unadulterated rage, a look that could stop hearts. But seeing her, the mask crumbled. He ran a hand through his dark hair, exhaling sharply. Go back to bed, Charlotte, he said, voice rough. What happened? She walked toward him, drawn to the window. She looked past him at the city. 2 miles away, near the industrial district, a plume of black smoke choked the gray sky. One of my warehouses, Nicholas said flatly. Firebombed. 3 of my men are critical. Charlotte gasped, hand flying to her mouth. Fedorov? He sent a message. Nicholas picked up a paper from the table and handed it to her. A printed email. Short. Brutal. Give me the girl by noon, or the next fire will be the tower. I will burn your city to ash to get what is mine. Charlotte stared at it. The words swam before her eyes. The girl. What is mine? She wasn't a person. She was the match that started this fire. I did this, she stammered, backing away. He's hurting your people because of me. Your men are dying because of me. Stop, Nicholas said firmly. He closed the distance, gripping her shoulders. Fedorov did this. Not you. He's a terrorist. We don't negotiate with terrorists. But he won't stop. Charlotte cried, tears spilling over. He needs the money, Nicholas. He's desperate. He'll kill everyone you know just to get to me. Then let him try, Nicholas vowed, eyes burning with that terrifying, protective intensity. I'm doubling the guard. Calling in every favor I have. You're safe here. He kissed her forehead, a brief, fierce touch that felt like a seal of protection, then turned away. I have to go down to the lobby security center. Stay here. Don't answer the door for anyone but me. He grabbed his jacket and stormed out. The heavy door locked automatically with a thud that felt final. Charlotte stood alone in the silence. She touched her forehead where his lips had been. She thought of Isabella. Nicholas had already lost one person he loved to forces beyond his control. Now he was fighting a war he couldn't win without losing everything he'd built. If I stay, he burns, Charlotte realized with sickening clarity. I'm the anchor dragging him down. She looked at the smoke rising in the distance. That was on her conscience. If the tower was next, if Nicholas was next, she wouldn't survive the guilt. Slowly, calmly, a strange numbness settled over her. The numbness of sacrifice. She walked to the desk and found a notepad. Her hands didn't shake as she wrote. Nicholas. You saved me when no one else would. You made me feel like I wasn't just a signature. But I can't let you bleed for me. This is my debt, not yours. Don't come after me. Please, just live. Charlotte. She tore off the page and left it on the guest bed pillow. She didn't pack a bag. Didn't change out of the jeans and sweater Nicholas had provided. She grabbed her phone from the nightstand, shoving it into her pocket. She took the service elevator to the basement garage, slipping past distracted staff shouting about the fire. She walked out the back exit into the cold, biting alley wind. Her fingers trembled as she dialed the numbers she'd memorized years ago. Uncle Fedorov, she whispered when the line clicked open. Charlotte, his voice slithered through the speaker, smug and oily. I knew you'd come to your senses. Stop the fires, she said, voice dead. Leave the Brunos alone. Come home, Tichka, and the city sleeps in peace. I'm at the corner of 4th and State, she said. Come get me. She hung up. 10 minutes later, a black sedan with tinted windows screeched to the curb. The door opened. Victor, the tracker from the diner, sat inside, grinning beneath a bandaged forehead. Good girl, he sneered. Charlotte didn't look back at the gleaming tower where Nicholas was. She couldn't. If she looked back, she'd break. She stepped into the car. The door slammed. The lock engaged. As the sedan sped toward the private airfield, Charlotte stared at her phone, thumb hovering over the screen, tempted to send one last text. But she didn't. She just gripped it tight, unaware that deep inside the device, a tiny line of code was already screaming out to the only man who could save her. The elevator doors slid open with a soft ding that sounded like a funeral bell in the silent penthouse. Nicholas walked in, shaking rain from his coat. The security meeting had been brutal but necessary. He'd tripled perimeter guards, authorized hazard pay, and put a bounty on any Russian vehicle spotted within 5 miles. He'd done everything a general does to secure his fortress. Charlotte, he called out, loosening his tie. I brought lunch. Silence answered him. Cold unease prickled down his spine. It wasn't just quiet, it was empty. The air felt stagnant, void of Charlotte's nervous energy. Charlotte. He moved faster, striding down the hallway. Pushed open the guest suite door. The bed was made. The room pristine. On the pillow, a single sheet of notepad paper waited. Nicholas picked it up, hand trembling, not from fear, but from a sudden, violent surge of adrenaline. He read it once. Twice. Don't come after me. Please, just live. She was gone. Walked straight into the wolf's den to save him. Nicholas crumpled the note in his fist. For a heartbeat, he was paralyzed. Isabella's ghost rose up in the room, suffocating him. It's happening again, the voice whispered. You turned your back, and she's gone. You failed. The walls closed in. The grief he'd buried for 3 years clawed at his throat, threatening to drag him under. No. Nicholas squeezed his eyes shut and exhaled a sharp, jagged breath. He wasn't that helpless 29-year-old anymore. wasn't sitting by a hospital bed praying for miracles. He was the Don of Chicago. And he didn't rely on prayers, he relied on preparation. He spun and sprinted to his study, throwing the crumpled note into the fireplace as he passed. He slammed his hand onto his desk, waking his laptop. Didn't call the police. Didn't scream at his guards. He opened a specific encrypted program, Ghost Track version 4.0. A map of Chicago and its suburbs flooded the screen. A single, pulsing red dot blinked on the grid. Beep. 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 Nicholas stared at it. His chest heaved with relief so potent it almost brought him to his knees. She hadn't ditched the phone. Got you, he whispered, voice feral. The dot was moving fast. 60 miles per hour. Heading north, away from the city, toward the private airfields and sprawling estates of old money. Nicholas zoomed in. The trajectory was clear. They weren't taking her to a warehouse. They were taking her to the Vlasov estate, a fortress in the countryside where they could force a marriage ceremony away from witnesses. He grabbed his phone and dialed Marco. Get the car, Nicholas ordered. The armored Escalade. And bring the heavy team. Boss? Where are we going? Marco asked, hearing the lethal edge in his voice. North. We have a wedding to crash. Nicholas didn't hang up. He dialed a second number, not a hitman this time, but Silas, the most expensive, ruthless attorney in Illinois. Silas, Nicholas barked, grabbing a fresh holster from his safe and checking the magazine of his custom Sig Sauer. I need you to draft a document. Immediately. Nicholas? It's noon on a Tuesday, the lawyer stammered. I need a marriage license, Nicholas said, voice stone cold. Predated. And I need an emergency petition for guardianship transfer based on imminent danger. I want Fedorov buried in paperwork before I even put a bullet in him. Guardianship? Marriage? Nicholas, you can't just. Do it, Silas. Nicholas roared, the sound echoing off glass walls. I want restraining orders, cease and desists, and a frozen asset order ready within the hour. Meet me at the Vlasov estate. Bring a judge if you have to bribe one. He hung up and strode toward the elevator. He checked his watch. The dot was 20 minutes ahead. As the elevator descended, Nicholas studied his reflection in the mirrored doors. He didn't look like a businessman anymore. He looked like a storm. She thought she was saving him. Thought she was a burden. She didn't understand that she was the only thing keeping his heart beating. You wanted a war, Fedorov? Nicholas thought, hand resting on his gun. I'm bringing you an apocalypse. The elevator opened into the garage. Marco and 6 heavily armed men waited by idling escalades. The engines roared, filling the concrete space with pure power. Nicholas slid into the back seat, eyes glued to the tablet in his hand. The red dot had stopped moving. She'd arrived. Drive, Nicholas commanded. If we hit traffic, drive through it. The convoy peeled out of the garage, tires screeching, tearing into the rainy Chicago streets. Nicholas watched the red dot pulsing on the screen, matching the rhythm of his own heart. Hold on, Charlotte, he prayed silently. I'm coming. The private chapel on the Vlasov estate smelled of expensive lilies in decay. It was a cold stone room designed for funerals, not weddings. Charlotte stood at the altar, shivering in a vintage lace wedding dress reeking of mothballs. It had belonged to one of Vlasov's dead wives. Sergei Vlasov stood beside her, a man made of grease and cruelty. 50 years old, with yellowing eyes that undressed her right in front of the priest. He gripped her hand so hard her fingers went numb, the gaudy diamond ring cutting into her skin. Read the vows, Uncle Fedorov barked from the front pew, checking his Rolex. We don't have all day. The priest, a nervous man with sweat beading on his upper lip, flipped through his Bible with trembling hands. Do you, Charlotte, take this man? Charlotte stared at the stained glass window. She tried to dissociate. I'm not here. I'm back at the diner. Wiping down counters. Nicholas is drinking espresso. But Nicholas wasn't there. She'd left him. Chosen this prison to keep him safe. Say I do, Vlasov whispered, breath reeking of onions and vodka. He squeezed her hand painfully. Say it, or I send a team to burn that pretty tower with your boyfriend inside. A tear tracked through the heavy makeup they'd forced onto her face. Charlotte opened her mouth. Crash. The heavy oak doors didn't just open, they exploded inward. Splinters rained down like confetti. The priest dropped his Bible. Fedorov jumped to his feet. Vlasov spun around. Silhouetted in the doorway, framed by the gray storm light, stood Nicholas Bruno. He wasn't wearing his morning suit. He wore a tactical vest over his dress shirt, an AR-15 slung across his chest, and a look of pure Old Testament wrath on his face. Behind him, 6 masked men fanned into the chapel, weapons raised. Red laser sights danced across the pews, landing on Fedorov's chest, Vlasov's forehead, the priest's Bible. I object, Nicholas said. His voice was calm but carried the weight of a death sentence. Bruno! Fedorov screamed, face turning purple. This is private property. You're trespassing. Nicholas walked down the aisle, boots echoing on stone. He ignored Fedorov's guards, already zip-tied outside by his team. He stopped 3 feet from the altar. Didn't look at the men. Looked straight at Charlotte. I told you, Nicholas said, voice softening just for her. You don't leave the building without me. Nicholas, she sobbed, relief so intense her knees buckled. They'll kill you. They can try. Nicholas turned to Vlasov. He raised his rifle slightly. Let go of her hand. Or you lose the arm. Vlasov released her like she was made of fire, stumbling back against the altar. Fedorov stepped into the aisle, desperate. You can't take her. I'm her legal guardian. The law is on my side, Italian. She's a minor in the estate's eyes until she marries. If you take her, I'll have you arrested for kidnapping. Nicholas smiled, a terrifying, shark-like smile. You're right, Fedorov, Nicholas said, handing his rifle to Marco. He reached into his vest pocket. The law says she's your ward until she marries. That's the clause, isn't it? The trust unlocks and your guardianship ends the moment she says I do. Exactly. Fedorov sneered. And she's marrying Vlasov. No, Nicholas said. She isn't. He turned to the entrance. Silas. Now. A short man in a sharp suit walked in carrying a leather briefcase. He looked out of place among the commandos but walked with the confidence of a man who charged $1,000 an hour. Silas opened the briefcase on a pew and pulled out a document stamped with the official Cook County clerk seal. What is this? Fedorov demanded. A marriage license, Nicholas said. He stepped to the altar, displacing Vlasov with a shove. He stood before Charlotte, taking her trembling hands in his. Fedorov, you wanted her married to access the trust, Nicholas said, eyes locking onto Charlotte's. So let's give you what you wanted. She gets married. Today. Right now. He looked at the terrified priest. Father, you're already here. Skip to the end. You can't be serious, Vlasov sputtered. I'm very serious, Nicholas said. He pulled out a ring, not a gaudy diamond, but a simple, elegant platinum band. His mother's ring, grabbed from the safe along with his gun. He slid it onto Charlotte's finger. It fit perfectly over the scar on her wrist. Charlotte, Nicholas said, ignoring the chaos, ignoring the guns. Marry me. Not for the money. Not for safety. But because I'm not leaving here without you. Charlotte looked at the ring, then at him. She saw the desperation in his eyes, the fear of losing her that mirrored her own. Yes, she whispered. Yes. Pronounce it, Nicholas ordered the priest. I pronounce you man and wife, the priest squeaked. Nicholas turned to Fedorov. The smile was gone. She's married, Nicholas announced. Which means your guardianship is void. She's no longer your ward. She's Mrs. Bruno. Fedorov staggered back, realizing the trap had snapped shut. You can't. Silas, Nicholas snapped. The lawyer slapped a thick stack of papers onto Fedorov's chest. Restraining order, Silas recited efficiently. Effective immediately. Civil suit for embezzlement of trust funds, and, oh yes, the FBI's waiting outside. Something about warehouse firebombing? We sent them security footage of your men buying accelerants. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Fedorov looked at the papers, then at the lasers pointed at his chest, finally at his niece standing safely in the arms of Chicago's most dangerous man. He collapsed onto the pew, defeated not by a bullet but by a signature. Nicholas didn't watch the police drag him away. He scooped Charlotte up bridal style. "Let's go home," Nicholas said. "To the tower?" Charlotte asked, burying her face in his neck. "No," Nicholas kissed the top of her head. "Home." 3 months had passed since the storm, but for the first time in years, spring sun was actually hitting the floorboards of the Bruno penthouse. The space had changed. The cold, sterile glass box Nicholas once treated as a fortress now smelled of fresh espresso, vanilla candles, and, miraculously, life. There were throw blankets on the leather sofas. Flowers on the granite island. Nicholas stood on the balcony, looking out over the city he ruled. But the city looked different now. It wasn't just a grid of territories and threats. It was just a view. He sipped his coffee, hearing the soft hum of the elevator. Charlotte walked in. She didn't look like the terrified waitress in the oversized uniform anymore. She wore a tailored cream blouse and jeans, her hair falling loose around her shoulders in soft waves. She looked healthy. She looked free. "You're home early," Charlotte said, smiling as she set her bag down. "The lawyers finished the paperwork," Nicholas said, turning to face her. "Fedorov was sentenced this morning. 20 years. Federal prison. No parole." Charlotte stopped. She released a long, slow breath, as if she'd been holding it for 90 days. "It's really over?" "It's over," Nicholas confirmed. He walked to the kitchen island and picked up a thick manila envelope. "And this is the rest of it." He slid it toward her. "Your trust fund. The accounts have been transferred to your name solely. You have full access. The diner, Tony's place, I finalized the deed transfer this morning. You own the building, just like you wanted. Tony can retire in peace." Charlotte touched the envelope. It represented millions of dollars. The freedom she'd run away to find. "So," Nicholas said, his voice unusually quiet. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms to hide the sudden tremor in his hands. "You have your money. You have your safety. The threat is gone." He looked at her, dark eyes guarding his heart. "Our deal is done, Charlotte. You don't have to stay here. The marriage, we can annul it quietly. You can go anywhere in the world." The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Nicholas waited for her to grab the envelope. Waited for her to thank him and leave. It was what he deserved. He was a man of violence, she was a creature of light. He'd forced her into this life to save her, but he wouldn't force her to stay. Charlotte looked at the envelope. Then she looked at Nicholas. She saw the tension in his shoulders. Saw the way he was bracing himself for her departure, just like he'd braced himself for Isabella's death. He was preparing to lose her. Slowly, Charlotte picked up the envelope and dropped it into the trash can. Nicholas blinked, stunned. "Charlotte?" "I don't want to go anywhere," she said softly, stepping around the island. She walked up to him, invading his personal space, fearless in a way she never could have been 3 months ago. "You didn't marry me just for the paperwork, Nicholas," she challenged, blue eyes searching his. "I married you to save your life," he said hoarsely. "And you did," she whispered. She reached out and took his hand, the rough, dangerous hand that had held a gun for her. She turned it over, interlacing her fingers with his. But why did you save me? Really? Nicholas looked down at her. He thought of his sister. Thought of the guilt that had eaten him alive for 3 years. But looking at Charlotte now, he didn't see a ghost. Didn't see a replacement. I saw her, at first, Nicholas admitted, voice raw. When I saw you in the diner, terrified and alone. I saw Isabella. I thought if I could save you, I could fix the past. He raised his free hand to cup her cheek, thumb brushing over her skin with reverence. But I didn't crash that wedding for Isabella, Nicholas said. I did it for you. I didn't want to save a memory, Charlotte. I wanted to save you. Charlotte leaned into his touch, closing her eyes. Then stopped trying to send me away. I'm a dangerous man, Nicholas warned, though his resolve was shattering. This life, it's not a fairy tale. I know, Charlotte said, opening her eyes. She lifted her left hand. The platinum band, his mother's ring, glinted in the sunlight. Beneath it, the jagged white scar on her wrist was still visible. I don't need a fairy tale, she said fiercely. I had a fairy tale life in my uncle's penthouse, and it was a prison. I don't want safe, Nicholas. I want real. I want the man who tore the world apart to find me. She pulled his hand to her lips and kissed his knuckles. I'm not your prisoner. I'm your wife. Nicholas let out a ragged breath, the last wall around his heart crumbling into dust. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. He tapped the screen 3 times and held it up for her to see. Ghost track, uninstalled. No more trackers, Nicholas said. I trust you. I know, she smiled. He didn't say anything else. Didn't need to. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair, inhaling the scent of vanilla and peace. He kissed her, not a desperate kiss in a chapel, but a slow, deep promise in the sunlight. The ghost of Isabella was gone, finally resting in peace. The King of Chicago wasn't alone in his tower anymore. Down on the street, the city moved on, oblivious. But high above the noise, Nicholas Bruno held his wife, and for the first time in his life, he didn't check the exits. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. Home. What would you sacrifice for a second chance at happiness? Have you ever had to choose between the life you knew and the life you needed? Share your story, I'd love to hear it. Thank you for joining Charlotte and Nicholas on their journey from fear to freedom, from loneliness to love. If this story of dangerous protection and unexpected devotion resonated with you, subscribe now, turn on notifications, and share this with someone who needs to hear that even the most broken souls can find home in each other. See you in the next story.